Welcome to Aging Insights. I'm Grace Egan, Executive Director of the New Jersey Foundation for Aging. Aging Insights is produced by the New Jersey Foundation for Aging to provide information and resources to boomers, seniors, and caregivers. Today we are going to talk about the important elements of good financial planning, especially when you or a loved one is coping with a chronic disease. We are joined today by Martin Shenkman, who is a CPA, MBA, and who's also an attorney. Martin has a law practice in Paramus, New Jersey, and has authored 40 books. Martin, thank you for being here today.
Pleasure, Grace.
You know, it's interesting as we were talking about putting this interview together and about this important topic, that there really are some unique needs that when you're considering financial planning and you have some of these issues that you need to consider. So perhaps you can explain what the differences are.
Let me first redefine the topic more broadly, because I think one of the big mistakes people make, not just seniors, everybody, is they define it too narrowly. We're going to talk about estate and financial planning, because if you really want to accomplish what I think the ultimate goal of all this is, which is peace of mind and real protection for you and your loved ones, you need to take a very broad view of the topic. You can't get very narrow and look just at investments or just at a will. You need to look very broadly. And one of our goals is to define what people need to do and explain it so they'll know how to approach the process. When you have someone that has a chronic illness or a loved one has a chronic illness, you need to reevaluate all the financial and estate planning that you do so that it's tailored to meet your specific needs. One of the major problems is that most people assume estate planning is a will. It's much more. Many people assume that if you have a chronic illness that somehow anybody with a health issue is lumped in one big pot. And the variations from Parkinson's to MS to Alzheimer's are dramatic. And even within one disease, your experience with a particular disease or health challenge that you have could be dramatically different than someone else with the same disease or health challenge. So we need to help people understand what they need to communicate to their professional advisors, what very simple steps they can take themselves to protect themselves and their loved ones.
So it is a unique picture that we have to put together when
Correct.
someone comes in for such assistance.
Correct, and it's nothing to be overwhelmed about. Much of it becomes common sense, but what we need to do is sort of build an awareness of what people need to do. And I can give you a very simple example. If somebody is dealing with Alzheimer's themselves, if they've been diagnosed, it's emotionally traumatic. It is very difficult to come to terms with. Many people get very depressed because of the tragic nature. It ultimately leads to incompetency and ultimately to death. But what you really need to do is refocus on life and living and what you can do to protect yourself and your loved ones. You may have a fairly limited time frame in which you can take action. And if you do it while you're well enough to do it, it doesn't become a horrific burden. Too often, and it's heartbreaking even on a personal level as a lawyer, watching clients struggle, people wait till they've reached a level of debilitation where they really can't take the actions they need, and it's a struggle and they never can really achieve what they need. And even more sad to see is when somebody doesn't take the protective actions and then they get taken advantage of by a caregiver or some disgruntled family member. People need to be wary, because what's referred to, and I resent the title, it's called elder financial abuse. And I resent the title because it's not just the elderly, it's anybody who's infirm or has a weakness can be taken advantage of. It's become a new specialty area in the law. And what's tragic about that is that means it's become probably almost epidemic, or significant in the number of incidences that occur. If somebody has multiple sclerosis or ulcerative colitis or even COPD, and may have an attack, you need to plan for what the consequences financially and legally are from having an attack and how to protect yourself and your loved ones. And that's something most estate and financial planners don't focus on, because if you sat down at a meeting and you're talking to them, they're going to say in their mind, okay, this is Grace and this is how she is and this is how we're going to plan.
This is how she is now.
Correct, but they don't go to the next step. And it's incumbent on your viewers that they have to tell the professionals, the investment planner, the financial planner, the accountant, the attorney, here is what I face, here are the challenges I face, because the professionals aren't going to know or understand.
Martin, I want to stop you right there, because obviously you're expressing...
I'm a lawyer, I keep talking.
No, I know,
but
you're expressing it with such passion, and I think maybe it would be helpful for our viewers to understand how you kind of came to this path and why you're taking this on.
Well, I would have been passionate about it anyhow, because
okay.
the heartache that occurs that's so avoidable, I would be passionate about trying to help. My wife was diagnosed about 6 years ago with multiple sclerosis, and as an attorney, an accountant, an author, I've written tons of stuff. I was absolutely appalled at the not just limited, but almost lack of any substantive professional information on planning for people with not just MS, but as I began to look, any chronic illness. There were a couple of articles I found on Alzheimer's, but for the most part, not a lot has been done with this. There's one very big exception, which I need to acknowledge, and it's something we're not going to talk about, which is elder law or Medicaid planning. For those that need to preserve their funds for nursing home, and I'm not minimizing it, it's vital. That's not my specialty. But when you get beyond that, all the things we're going to talk about and that we've talked about so far, there's really been very little on it. So I've kind of made it my personal mission to address that. I've written, I think, 3 books. I have a 4th in process.
Just on this topic? On
different aspects of planning for chronic illness. Demos Medical is publishing them all. I don't mind plugging it because all the royalties go to charity. I don't make a penny. And I've probably published about 30 articles and done 50 speeches on this topic. And we set up a charity, chronicillnessplanning.org, or RV for the Cause, because we travel by RV. It's become too hard to travel by plane. And
for you and your wife together.
Right.
That's very
we
nice.
travel around the country and lecture to different groups about the topics that we're talking about today. I know I keep going on, but let me throw in one other point. One of the reasons it's so important for listeners to be proactive, and I don't quite know where the statistic came from, but the statistic that I've read is that 96% of the symptoms of chronic illness are invisible. If you have a chronic fatigue that makes it impossible to function, chronic pain that makes it impossible to focus, pain, fatigue, vision problems, these aren't visible signs that an outside party, your accountant, your attorney, the people helping you plan, they can't see that if you don't tell them about the consequences. So it's very important that you communicate and you feel empowered to communicate to your professionals. And if you ever confront a professional that either is not interested or not willing to invest a modicum of time to try to understand your challenges, fire them.
Yeah, I was going to say, at some point I really want to talk about what people should look for in the process of trying to set up a plan for themselves. But I also think you've touched on an important part, that it also can help family members and caregivers to understand there is such a plan. And maybe are they involved when they come to your office? Do people bring family members?
You've asked a couple of very good questions. Let me answer the last one first. Most people are not having their family or caregivers involved, and it's a tragic mistake. You know, there's an old saying, like, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a team to make an estate and financial plan. If you have a chronic illness, it's even more important, but your loved ones, and I'm not going to use definitions because it'll vary by person to person, whether it's a spouse or your best buddy or a partner or your aunt or your niece. The people that are your core that you rely on need to be involved. Everybody that has more than one advisor, and many people, even without great wealth, will still have an accountant and an investment person they work with, and they're going to go to an attorney for a will. Simply getting a quick conference call so everybody's on the same page won't add a lot to anybody's bill, but it'll be invaluable for making sure everything is coordinated. I think the steps that people need to take in general are the same steps we all need to take. You need to put together information, balance sheet, family data, whether they're included or not included, the names of key people you can rely on. It's an important issue. But then the extra step when you have chronic illness, and as the population continues to age, the incidence of chronic illness will grow. There's now estimates of 130 million Americans living with chronic illness. You need to explain what your disease is and the disease course so the people that work with you can understand it.
So I think it's also helpful to have that guidance in terms of a physician and other people at least giving you a good barometer about the progression of your disease.
That's very important, and I think one of the unfortunate difficulties with that, many people find it so unpleasant to hear the bad news they tend to certainly in the beginning, go through a phase of denial, whether you believe in the Kubler-Ross phases or not. There's certainly a transition through periods of denial. And the problem is, like we used the example earlier on of Alzheimer's, if you deny, and it took some years to diagnose it because a lot of these diseases are complicated and very similar to other issues and may not be diagnosed right away. MS is often very puzzling to identify.
That's true.
You've lost valuable time already, so it's important to plan. And when you have the peace of mind to know that you've done what's right and your caregivers or loved ones know that they're as protected as possible and you're protected, everyone's happier. We should really go through some of the steps people need to take that are specific so they get some good specific guidance.
Sure. I mean, I was thinking of just protecting yourself if you feel you're going to become incompetent, but where would you, where would you start?
I would start with the basics.
Okay.
And whether or not you're going to become incompetent, one statistic, and I know it's not quite correct, but just to give a parameter, 50% of those over age 85 have some cognitive impairment. Now, I believe the statistic was somewhat misquoted, and it doesn't give any impact to what degree and what spheres and so on. But the point is, we should all plan for that eventuality. Much better to have your plan in place and not need it than to need it and not have it. Here's the core. Get together balance sheet, family data, family tree, key contact data for emergencies.
Before you're 85.
You should, anybody that's old enough to turn on the TV set, if you're 18 or over, you need to do this.
That's right.
The Terry Schiavo tragedy happened at a horribly young age, and we should all learn one valuable lesson from the heartache that family suffered. Do your planning now. Family tree, balance sheet, key contact data, and some data about your health status. That's some of the basics you need. And if you want to save money on your professionals, put all that together well ahead of time. The more organized you are going in and the more data that you have that's intelligently put together, not only the safer you'll be, because that's what your family will need to help you in an emergency or your loved ones, but that's what your advisors are going to need to plan. Then there's, let's call it roughly 5 key documents everybody listening should have. Power of attorney, that's a document in which you designate an agent to make financial decisions. And it has to be what's called durable, so it continues in effect even if you're disabled. Everyone should have a HIPAA release, Health Insurance Portability Accountability Act. They are not a standard form, but you want to be able to authorize loved ones or people you'll rely on to access medical data. So if we used an example earlier of ulcerative colitis, COPD, MS, you have an attack and you go to the hospital, you don't have to give up decision making because as the attack subsides or you're treated in a few weeks, you'll be fully in control of all your decisions again, most likely. But
and that's with the HIPAA. But
you want someone to be able to look at your medical documents during the interim, and that's the HIPAA release. That's the second of the 5.
Now, you're not considering the HIPAA release healthcare proxy or a living will, or
We're getting there.
Okay, I just wasn't sure if they were the words for the same thing.
No, good question.
I tried.
And I didn't make up these terms, so please don't shoot me as confusing because these are the terms that the system has created. So HIPAA release is one of the documents. The next, let's use the health proxy that you mentioned. Health proxy, just to keep folks confused and so lawyers can sound more intelligent, we can call it a health care proxy, a health proxy, medical directive, medical power of attorney. They all mean the same thing. That document is to designate and authorize somebody. You, Grace, are my healthcare proxy. I designate you to make healthcare decisions if I cannot do so. Now, the problem with what a lot of people do is they'll print something off the internet. Be very careful. If you have any religious belief or affiliations, or if you specifically don't have a religious belief or affiliation, if your document doesn't address that, you're creating potential issues and challenges with family and others. Deal with religious issues. If you are religious and want religious beliefs to apply, say so. If you are of a particular faith and don't want those restrictions to apply, say so. You also need to be mindful that the sort of media soundbite, because our country loves to live on a soundbite, which is unfortunate because it's so, even if it tries to be honest, it distorts by simplicity. This is not just to pull the plug. You're trying to authorize someone to make a full range of medical decisions if you can't make them. And it doesn't mean that you may not recover. It's not only end of life. Now, the other thing to bear in mind, if you have a chronic illness or if you're aging and have specific challenges, talk to your doctor. What kind of issues may come up? What might my healthcare agent need to do? For example, if you have Parkinson's, Michael J. Fox was just on CNN last night on one of the shows and was talking about some of the things in the pipeline to revolutionize, hopefully, the treatment of Parkinson's. You may very well want to authorize that your agent can direct or mandate experimental treatment. That's something that's not addressed in most provisions, so most documents. So we've talked about HIPAA release, I'm sorry, power of attorney, HIPAA release, health proxy. The next one you mentioned is the living will. That document is sort of a supplement to the health proxy. The living will is where you express all of your healthcare wishes. So you may have details about palliative care, wanting to be in a nursing home, not be in a nursing home, more detail about religious issues and how you want them handled. That's where you put all your personal wishes. You must have a healthcare proxy no matter what. A living will is not respected in every state, although most do. And a living will, though, also serves in case your proxy, your agent, can't be reached. If the living will is in your medical file, which is what you want to ask your physician to do, in an emergency, the physicians may at least be able to look at the medical file and see your living will to know something of what you wanted if an agent's not there. So you really should do all three medical-related documents. I fibbed, but now they'll know I'm a real attorney. I said 5 documents. The next is a will. There's really nothing unique about chronic illness or aging in a will other than you should do it. Perhaps the couple of little nuances are that if you have a progressive chronic illness or cognitive impairment, you don't want family members to name you to be their executor or fiduciary because it may not be appropriate for you to serve. It's probably better for them not to name you.
Oh, so let's just go back because you were running through that a little quickly. So what you're saying is...
Another cup of coffee, I'll go faster.
No. If you have a chronic disease, then you don't want to be named as someone else's executor. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Well, I'm not saying you don't want to be, but you should evaluate whether you should be.
Whether you could carry out the task.
Correct. And if you have a disease that leads to cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's, maybe, but not necessarily Parkinson's or MS, so you have to determine what you have. Maybe it's something where you should resign now or have them, when they next revise their document, take you out and avoid the complexity of having to remove you later.
Right, because then it's additional work and cost, et cetera.
Exactly. And while we all love our lawyers, we don't need to make extra work for them. The other component of a will is if you, Grace, decide, because you've enjoyed this show so much, that you're going to name me as your beneficiary in your will, if I had a significant chronic illness, and I'm actually a member of the club, diabetes, if you have named me, depending on my circumstances, it might be advantageous to have a special needs trust set up in your will so that what you bequeath to me, because I have a health issue, if it's significant enough, and in my case it's not at all, then it would be in a trust to protect those monies from Medicaid, nursing home, and so on and so forth. So those are the only spins on a will. So I just want to amend what I said before with 5. I couldn't count quick enough on air. I was nervous. So let's call it 6 documents. For a large number of people, if you are getting on in years, even without a chronic illness, but especially with a chronic illness, evaluate using a revocable living trust. And that's something that if we have time, I'd like to chat with you about it for a couple minutes.
Okay. What's the difference between a general power of attorney and a springing power of attorney? Is that... Okay, now we're going back to the first document. That's fine. Okay. Power of attorney, again, you designate an agent to take care of tax, legal, financial matters. A general, let me define all the terms real quick and make it easy. Sure. You have what could be a general power of attorney, which is the most common. It means you're authorizing the agent in general to take care of everything. Okay. So it's a broad, sweeping power. There's a limited power. I'm going on vacation. I need someone to take care of selling my house. Grace, you're my best buddy. I'm going to name you agent solely to sell my house, nothing else. Got it. And when you have a chronic illness, in some instances, you may need to give away the broad power because who else is going to take care of things? And if your illness is declining or progressing, rather, you want to make sure someone's there to protect you. Most powers are broad general powers. If you have a type of illness typified by attacks, exacerbations, flare-ups, COPD, MS, ulcerative colitis, and you're relatively healthy and have many decades left to live and there's no significant permanent cognitive impact, maybe you create a limited power of attorney today so that if you're hospitalized with a flare-up, your agent can take care of paying some immediate bills and do things like that, but they can't change the beneficiary on your life insurance and your IRA. You don't need to give up that level of control. So it's a way to get more flexibility. So that's spelled out in the document?
Yes.
Okay.
And everyone that signs one of these, they're fairly basic questions, but vital questions that you ask. They need to understand what they're signing and why.
Right.
And if they have a disease that is typified by flare-ups, they should talk to their attorney about an immediate, and I'll contrast that with springing in a second, limited power. Why give up control over your life if you may be hospitalized for 2 weeks and fine thereafter? The other buzzword you used is durable. That's just a funky term, a historical anachronism of how powers of attorney developed hundreds of years ago in England. If it doesn't say it's durable, that it will continue to be valid if you have a disability, it will become invalid. You need to do that. Every state has different lingo that you want, so that's why whoever's listening to this video,
in New Jersey,
but they may hear it far and wide.
We do have viewers in Pennsylvania and other states. You're right.
We're going to broadcast this everywhere,
we
Grace.
do.
We're going live on YouTube. We're going to be the YouTube sensation.
Actually, we are on YouTube. You're right.
You got to talk to an attorney in your state so you get the right lingo.
Okay.
A durable power, I don't know that I've ever seen a power not durable, because why are you signing to authorize someone to take care of financial, legal, or tax emergencies and not making it valid when you're disabled is when you most want it? Springing power is a power of attorney that only becomes effective when you're disabled. Here's the rationale. Why should I let my kids sign on my bank account today? I'm perfectly fine.
Right.
They may argue and say I'm senile already, but you'll talk to my kids another time. But why give them control today? I'll make it spring into being, spring into effect when I become disabled. The concept is brilliant, makes a lot of sense. Practically speaking, it's very problematic. How do you determine when I'm disabled? At what point am I disabled? And if you have a chronic illness that is progressive, Parkinson's, ALS, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, at what point on the continuum are you now disabled? So you're setting up a very complicated, problematic situation. And the other thing your listeners have to be very wary of, in some states, Florida's just one example I can think of, springing powers are not permitted, probably because of some of the issues we just talked about. Let me just recap in case we talk too fast. We talked about a power of attorney, HIPAA release for medical info, health proxy to designate an agent, living will to make healthcare, to set forth your healthcare personal wishes, some nuances of a will, and the final document was a revocable trust. The problem with revocable trusts is they're misunderstood and misused. A revocable trust, if properly done, will be the most powerful planning tool for anyone aging or anyone with a healthcare issue. Unfortunately, the whole focus that people think of a living trust for is, gee, I'm going to avoid the evils of probate. Now, speaking specifically to New Jersey, and I'll use Bergen County as an example, you couldn't find nicer people than the people in the surrogate's court. It's a few $100, a couple of hours of work, you don't even need a lawyer, you get the will admitted to probate. So avoiding probate is not the relevant issue. Why is a living trust so powerful? If you set up a trust today and you name a close family member and yourself as trustees, if you have a chronic illness or a health issue, as you decline, there's a co-trustee that has full authority to operate. It's much more powerful than a living trust. It's a document where, unlike a power of attorney, assets are in your name. So the agent under a power of attorney has to operate with assets in your name. It's more complicated, more problematic. In a living trust, if you put the assets into the trust, you and your trustee have legal authority to operate and work with those assets. In a living trust, you can include, for example, a mandate that a caregiver, a licensed independent caregiver, come in quarterly and do a review of your condition and issue a report to the trustee and to family members. You can build in all sorts of safeguards to protect your finances from elder financial abuse. You can build in safeguards for abuse generally by mandating the trustee have someone come in and meet you in your home once a quarter. There's a lot of wonderful things you can do with a living trust, and it really should be looked at by probably almost everybody, but look at it in a far broader way than this mere avoiding a probate, which is just not that big of a deal.
It sounds like an important tool. If you can identify different things that you feel you want to have in place, and they can be, someone can be authorized within that tool to, whether you're changing your home situation or as you say, bringing in a caregiver or an assessment or whatever it sounds.
Absolutely, and you just raised another quick point that's very important. Home. For people struggling with not just chronic illness, but even just the challenges of aging, oftentimes their home is a lot more than the proverbial, my home is my castle. Their home may have had all sorts of physical modifications. If they have debilitating issues, challenges, vision problems, they may be so intimately familiar with their home that any place else would never be as safe or comfortable for them. So a lot of the standard language in powers of attorney, living trust authorize people to sell or get rid of the home, review those before you sign.
Right. Now, because we're getting close to ending the program, I just want to know, what should someone look for when they want to set up a plan? I mean, what's the first professional or the team that they should put together?
Well, I think you really want a attorney to do the estate plan. If you use an accountant to file your tax returns, they should at least be involved at minimum on a conference call, and whoever's handling your investments. And the mistake a lot of people make is they kind of spread everything all over so they don't have one main investment person.
Got it.
Simplify and consolidate. That's a great way to deal with cognitive issues, challenges of aging, physical challenges. Get one person involved, that's your team. On the cheap end of the spectrum where you don't want to spend a lot of money, make a conference call between everyone, get them on the same page. Web conferencing is phenomenal. We've had 20-minute web conferences with the attorney, us as the attorney, the accountant, financial planner, maybe an insurance person. It's amazing what 3-4 professionals can do in 15-20 minutes.
Oh, I would imagine, and it's kind of a nice way to get everybody, as you say, on the same page. So
it's important to protect you because if one of your advisors is not a good apple, the others will catch it.
Well, the other thing is when someone is not responsive to your needs, as you sort of said earlier in the show,
fire them.
Fire them, go to another person.
Don't be shy.
Yeah, because I think it's important that someone really identify what your needs are as opposed to saying, as you said, you know, this is Grace today, but you know, in 15 years.
I think the vast majority of professionals are good-hearted, and they wouldn't be in a service profession, an accountant, attorney, financial planner, if they didn't like helping people. So I would go in on the premise that this person really does want to help. But now I'm going to put the onus back on your viewers. If you can't take the time to intelligently prepare and get an understanding of what your disease and your challenges are, what they might be in the future, you can't hold the professional responsible. And too many people don't want to be proactive. Yeah,
you need to be realistic, I think, and I think that's a good thing. Well, I have to say, we really covered a lot of information today, and I know you have a website, which is? It's
RV for the cause, recreational vehicle, because we travel with an RV when we do our lectures, and it can also be found as chronicillnessplanning.org.
Right, which I realized also links to the RV for a
same
cause.
thing. Same
so
thing.
I think it's really helpful because you've really covered a lot of details, and I'm sure people will want to say, how do I get more information?
Tons of information there. We add to it all the time, videos, webinars, and we keep adding. And if there's something that you, Grace, decide will be helpful to your viewers, if you let me know, I'll create the products and materials.
Well, that's great. I know we have a booklet on personal stories. It also tells people where their papers are. So I think, you know, things like that, tools are very helpful.
But the bottom line is people have to invest the time and the money and go to their attorney and their accountant and their financial planner, because if they'll invest a little money, time, and prepare ahead of time with their advisors, they'll get the best protection.
Okay. Well, again, I want to thank you very much for being here. We covered a lot of details, and so I just am very appreciative, and I know that we'll be working together in the future.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. In closing, I want to just say, I want to remind you about senior services in your area, and that you can contact your county offices on aging or the Aging and Disabled Resources Connection. You'll see a listing of their numbers on our website, and you may also call the state hotline number, which is 1-877-222-3737. We appreciate you joining us for this edition of Aging Insights. Until next time, take care, and remember, aging is everyone's business.